Hello, I'm Cat and welcome back to the second channel geography video. This is episode series where I talk about geography and the world and stuff. And today I want to talk about a particular part of world geography which everyone understands the core concept of very easily, literally everyone, because islands are something you can look at a map and say, yep, there's Greenland and there's Iceland and there's Great Britain, there's Madagascar and there's New Zealand. You can spot them all and you can be like, yep, easy stuff. Those are some island countries. They're probably different to regular ones because they have to take boats to get to other countries or planes or whatever. Okay, easy stuff. I understand islands now. Let's move on to the next thing. However, the truth is there's actually millions of islands in the world. You might not believe that number is so high, but it is such an inordinately large number, we don't even know exactly how many islands there is in the world. And the truth about this is it's so nuts because it means that when you think of a country, say Scotland from last week, you're thinking of like the main landmass of Scotland, or probably just the south landmass even, but the truth is there's these whole sets of islands with their distinct culture and ways of life that have to be different because of all the transport issues and just everything that relates to living on such a distinct, faraway island that, it's wacky that, yeah, you learn something about Scotland when you realize they have islands, 97 inhabited islands and hundreds of uninhabited ones. But the truth is every country has this issue, not just in the dozens of islands or the hundreds of islands, but some countries have thousands of islands or tens of thousands of islands or hundreds of thousands of islands that you're not thinking about when you think of that country. And I figured in today's video, why not talk about some more, some inhabited islands that you might not have realized were inhabited or that belong to a country, because that's something that I find interesting and maybe you will too. So before we start, I just want to clarify, yes, if you know everything about the world map and you know all the island groups, then I'm probably not going to shock you by being like, here's a brand new undiscovered island that I just found today on Google Maps. But no, the point of this video is just talk about some islands you probably didn't realize people lived on and had their whole own like weird separate lifestyles, from the country. So for instance, everyone knows Japan is an island because you look at it and you say, yep, that's an island nation. So obviously that's a thing. A key part of their history was trying to be insulated from the world. But you might not realize that the Japan-Russia border, because it's not marked on a map because it's a maritime border, actually stops just right here, just north of the Hokkaido Islands. So yeah, as soon as you go north of this, it goes straight into Russia. And it's also true as soon as you go past here, the Kuril Islands are also part of Russia. They're both actually part of the same Sakhalin Oblast, which is a Russian name for state, roughly close enough. Let's just say it's part of the Sakhalin Oblast, this island right here, as well as the islands around it. And this is fascinating. The reason for this is, as far as I can tell, back in the World War times, Japan and Russia weren't too friendly, and you can imagine at the end of World War II, Russia had a pretty good deal over Japan when it came to like being able to enforce stuff. So this island went back and forth a few times, and Sakhalin Island now belongs to Russia, and it's just kind of integral Russian territory. So yeah, the fascinating thing about this island to me though is not just the fact that it exists, it's the fact that 500,000 people live on this island, which is separate from the Russian mainland. Again, you picture Russia being this giant thing because it is the world's, it's got the highest area of any country in the world by a giant amount. You picture it being this one giant place, but the truth is it has so many islands where a decent amount of population actually can live, such as Sakhalin Island right here. So this island is a really primary sector based island, like it entirely based on like food and gas and stuff like that. I mean, a lot of Russia is, but like it's really, really intense here. But the fascinating thing to me is not just the fact that like, oh yeah, there's 500,000 people living on, kind of like olden day stuff, but it's also the fact that, olden days in terms of like how the economy works, but it's also fascinating that because it did belong to the Japanese for a bit, and then it was taken back by the Russians during the whole World War thing, basically there's still, to this day, there's a railway going through this island, which, again, I think railways are fascinating on these far out islands because they have to build them all the way out there, but it's not only fascinating because there is a railway, it's fascinating because the railway across the island uses the Japanese rail gauge, like the distance between the rails still. They're changing it to the day, like it'll be changed soon, but even to this day, they were still using, Japanese train distances. They had to get Japanese trains to run on those tracks, which is funny to me that like, oh yeah, so there's this Russian island that still has to be a bit Japanese because of that history. Also, there's tiny islands out here that can only really support fishing and stuff, also part of the Sakhalin Oblast. So yeah, while we're talking about islands of Russia, there's a whole bunch of them up north here. They're not inhabited, but like it's crazy they exist. But I always noticed there was an island called Bolshevik Island, and I looked it up once just, like, oh yeah, I'm curious why it's called that. It was only actually discovered during the Bolshevik Revolution, and or was later renamed a little bit. But still, the fact that an island this close to Russia, this like, again, because Russia is such a big place, it was only discovered in 1913, so just over 100 years ago, and only properly confirmed as an island and not just a separate place in like 1931. That's how recent some of these islands were discovered. By the way, these islands also Russian, and by the way, this island right here, definitely Russian, and also used for Russian nuclear tests. Even though it is an inhabited island, not many people actually live there, like it's in the hundreds, not in the tens of thousands or the hundreds of thousands. Yuzhny Island right here was actually used for Russian nuclear tests. You might recall they've done some of the biggest nuclear tests in the world. They did a lot of them right here, both below ground and above ground. So, sucks to live there because the Russians are doing nuclear tests, or maybe that's good because they probably like they bring a lot of military personnel, and there's probably money in that. I don't know, but just something worth mentioning. Yasny Island, a lot of nuclear tests done here, and also one of the funnier looking islands in the world. Like, Russian have this really nice little circle island right here. They've got these, weirdly shaped ones up here, and then they've got this, which is just we all know what we look at that and see. So yeah, that's Russia right there with the Russian islands. Lots of them to talk about, lots of them inhabited as you go all around the place. They've even got islands in the Black Sea, in fact, if I'm not mistaken, or the Caspian Sea as well as the Black Sea. But you can see, even in the sea right here, they actually do have some islands that belong to Russia, which is kind of wacky. That's just... Oh, wait, that's not... My mistake. Not those ones there. Those ones there. I got the wrong side of the border right there. Those are Kazakhstan islands. I mean, maybe one day they'll belong to Russia, but not right now. So yeah, with that said, let's talk about the next country, which has lots of islands you probably don't realize. And I want to talk about this one because we're talking about islands as being like, oh yeah, remote. Like, oh yeah, they have to take weird Japanese trains, and there's like a train ferry every now and then, connecting it. But the truth is sometimes, like in the case of Sweden, you get the kind of opposite situation. So first of all, again, this is the point I wanted to make for today's video. When you look at Sweden on a map, even a pretty close map of like just Europe, let's say, it looks like it's one pretty solid together place, right? Like, you look at the Fennoscandian Peninsula, this place up here, and although you see like, a two-headed dragon, that's totally what you see, even though that's what you see over here, when you look at this part of the map. When you look at Sweden, it looks like a pretty solid place of like a few lakes here and there, but the truth is Sweden has a lot of islands. So everyone knows that Norway is filled with fjords, which are basically islands. They look pretty beautiful. In fact, there's a famous like picture of like the Norwegian fjord with the the place you can look like you're jumping off the edge. That place right there, you've probably seen some variation of this photo, but no, that's not what we're here to talk about. We know it's talk about Norway. Everyone knows Norway has islands. Everyone knows Finland probably has some islands, but Sweden has a ridiculous number of islands. Like, even in like just certain archipelagos, you can see how it like really quickly adds up with like stuff like this. But the craziest one to me is the fact that Stockholm, which again looks really solid from even a pretty close into like just a Sweden map, as you get closer and closer to Stockholm, you realize it's an island city. It's not like it doesn't take place on one island, and this was a shock for me when I first went there. Like, obviously I looked on a map before, like I was like, oh yeah, Stockholm's like a few islands, but Stockholm isn't just a few islands. Stockholm is a city, or the county at least. The city limits are slightly smaller, but the county is across 24,000 islands. That's right. It's nuts to really realize that like there is a lot of islands all the way out here, and although not all of them are inhabited, obviously, a lot of them are, like a really decent number of them are. And the reason that is so significant is because, by the way, Gamla is the old town, so the old town has its own island. There's like this north bit, which is most of what you consider Stockholm. There's the south bit, which is a really decently sized bit. Mojang offices there, as well as an IKEA, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe that's where we're at. But anyway, I went there for like a week last year just to like explore the place a little bit, so that's why there's like some tiny bits I'll be referencing. But yeah, the fact the Stockholm is a pretty crazy place because it seems like so many different places just have their own islands. Like, oh yeah, there's like a museum island right here. There's got the Old Town Island. They've got like, I think their parliament has its own island. There's like a theme park island right there. Basically, it's kind of nuts that everything is connected by islands like this, but it's also kind of nutty when you even get to like any one of the island groupings. So Vaxholm, if I'm not mistaken, is a really famous, like kind of famous, I guess you could say, like place that they go for like, it's a Swedish beach town in a way for Stockholm, and this is how many islands just one part of the archipelago, like one, I guess, city, municipality style thing, actually does contain. There's a lot of them, and you realize as you're going over them, because I took a bus to get to Vaxholm at one point, you can realize that you're going over so many bridges, and the infrastructure cost of like connecting so many of these islands together, because like they're really nice bridges too. I'll show you a Swedish bridge connecting the islands. That's what you want to see right now, I know it. But you can see how like the bridges connect them are pretty decently designed things. They're not just like random wood structures. There's a lot of bridges out here, and immediately my brain is just like, the infrastructure cost on that is crazy. But yeah, Stockholm is an archipelago city essentially, which means that not only do a lot of people live in the city and move further out, but if you want to move in, to the suburbs in Stockholm, rather than moving, way out in this direction, like, or up there or something like that, you can move out and you can move to one of the islands. So you could like, again, live on one of the bigger islands, or you could move to your own island and just like get the daily speedboat into Stockholm, which is something that a lot of people genuinely really do, which is why I went I don't actually know what it is, I'm afraid to say. But there's a lot of islands out here where they've got like, 5 population per island or 1 population per island. So what they actually have to do is they have one slightly bigger island around there that they send people, like they put a school in that island, and then they'll send like a boat round, like a school boat round to pick people up, bring them to the island, stuff like that. Everything has to be done by boat when you live on islands that are this small, but they're close together so they can just about make something work. But it's crazy to me, this is one of the few, like, probably metropolitan island, archipelagos, like island collections in the world, well, because unlike, you know, like the Scottish Isles or the Russian Isles that are way out there, these can, you know, you can live like an hour commute from the city while living on your own remote island, which is nuts and cool. And yeah, I just wanted to say that 24,000 islands, you can commute from those islands to Stockholm. And if you want to live in a big city, you know, everyone loves the city, but you want to live in the suburbs, best place to do it is Stockholm, because you can have your own island. I'm just throwing that out there. I saw a lot of like own island advertised in Sweden. They're like a lot of krona, like 10 million. It was a ridiculous number of krona, and then you still convert into pounds, and you're like, well, that's more than I can ever realistically afford, but you could do it, and that's all that counts. That's the Swedish dream right there. So yeah, let's move on from Sweden and talk a bit about, I guess, France, because I'm going to avoid the UK's like territory thing, but France's territory thing is something I'd love to talk about because, again, most people think of France as being the hexagon or the pentagon. It looks more like a pentagon to me, but people call it a hexagon. Whatever. This bit of land right here that people know as France. However, France has quite a few islands, not just like off the west coast here. By the way, these islands, they look like they're French, but they're British. Long story. But yeah, basically, there's a lot of islands around France that are a part of France too, including Corsica, which is the big notable one. But when you see all of them, you're like, oh yeah, France doesn't have that many islands, does it? But the truth is, because of its overseas collectivity thing, there's a lot of parts of France which are not only island communities, but they're island communities so comically, you know, far away from France that you'd be like, really, is that a thing? Sint Maarten is the popular one. You can find they've got like Sint Maarten just over here. I always have like problems finding it. I'm like, I know exactly where Sint Maarten is, and then I'm like, oh, I think it's like this one. You know, it's one of those things. But Sint Maarten is just around here. I'll show you. In fact, Sint Maarten. The funny thing is like it is this island right there. Okay, I was zooming in on it, but I was like, wait a minute, is this the whatever? Anyway, my bing is this is Sint Maarten. Sorry, this is Sint Maarten. That's Sint Maarten. So this is part of France officially. You know, they're all French things. The only way to get into there is to fly in through the Netherlands and like cross the border. So long story. I mean, you can take boats, but anyway, point being is that there's a part of France right there. There's some other parts of France, the Caribbean, but there's also a part of France near Madagascar, the Reunion Island. There's also a part of France on the other side of Madagascar, the Mayotte Islands. There's also a part of France which is all the way out here. It's French Polynesia. It's just like out there. Again, like the island thing. Okay, I believe it's just over there. French Polynesia, which is 100 islands or so. Again, they're officially France in every way. They use, or in most ways, which is pretty wacky. But yeah, this is France technically. But like, do you consider this to be, when you're thinking of France, you picture the Eiffel Tower, you picture baguette and whatever else you're picturing, but you're not picturing French Polynesia, or especially you're not picturing, this is my favorite one, the French Southern and Antarctic Islands. This is, if I'm not mistaken, the most remote point you can be from a continent. Like, again, if you want to, like, let me just show you actually, that if you want to get to Africa, you go, I think it's 3,800 kilometers. If you want to go to, if you want to go to Australia, you go 4,000 kilometers. And if you're feeling like a short distance to your nearest continent, you can go to Antarctica in just 2,200 or 2,100 kilometers. So as you can see, really, really close to all those places. And yeah, it's one of the most ridiculously remote places on Earth. There is not really a permanent population there. Again, sometimes scientists go there if I'm not mistaken, but basically it's just there so they can have like an exclusive economic zone. One of those weird things where just apparently this is France. This is France right here, and you're not thinking of it. Also, there's lots of like tiny bits which are part of France, like, oh yeah, the island group has its own islands attached to it. So like, this is France, this is France, this is France too. This little bit right here is Timay. That's definitely France as well. And you're not thinking of France when you picture that place. So anyway, with that said, one more example I wanted to mention, and this is for the this is I guess about the US, both for Americans and I guess because. Yeah, both for Americans and for everyone who just thinks of America as being this one large place right here. So first of all, obviously when you picture America, you picture this weirdly shaped country, right? Like, oh yeah, everyone understands the core concept there. But the truth is America is not just the United States. I know Spanish speakers get upset when you call it America because to them, America is their whole like double continent thing. But yeah, America is, or the United States of America is this country right here. But it's this country right here plus Alaska. Everyone knows Alaska. Plus Hawaii. Most people know Hawaii. And you're like, Toy Cat, yes, I know about the Hawaiian Islands. That's what you're going to tell me about. But no, there's a lot of islands in America that people just don't properly focus on, such as not only the fact that like each state, every state has islands attached to it. I was shocked to learn that statistic, but every single state has an island of some form or another in the state somewhere. There's a lot of like tiny examples, even stuff like again, I was shocked to learn that like even Arkansas or even like New Mexico, something where you're like, I can't see the islands, but all of these states do in fact have islands of some form or another going on in there. So that was shocking to me. But as well as the fact that every state has its own islands, there's also a lot of pretty shocking islands with some states, like the Alaskan Islands go all the way out over here. In fact, the Attu Station, the furthest west of the Alaskan Islands, is actually, even though it's not properly inhabited all the time, it actually pushes the date border back, because the date line is meant to be -12 plus 12. Because these have the Alaskan time zone instead, they push the boundary back, and they mean that the date line, which should be a straight line, is this messy thing. Just a little bit up here, not as bad as down there, but still, fun little fact you might not know. And then also, as well as the date line being pushed back over there by these weird islands, I mean, they're weird relatively, but they're islands mostly inhabited by fishers, you know, like they're native people who just go fishing. They're part of Alaska officially. They are Alaskans, and yeah, this is a part of Alaska you do have to care about if you're in Alaska, I guess. And yeah, as well as that, we've got Florida with the Florida Keys. These came up recently because of the Hurricane Irma. But there's a lot of islands attached to Florida by this giant road right here. Again, they're just kind of islands near Florida, but they are all connected by road, which I think is kind of great. Because they used to be connected by a railway, but the railway was destroyed by a hurricane, and then they just weren't connected for a while. So they built themselves a giant highway. It's called Highway 1, if I'm not mistaken. Like, it gets number 1, isn't that cool? And it connects a bunch of different islands, of which are technically Florida, to the Florida mainland. And I think that's kind of cool that you can go all the way to, all the way out to here by road. Like, look, there's like a real town here at the edge of the Florida Keys. But yeah, there's the Florida Keys as well. Also, I can just talk about every state and be like, oh yeah, did you know New York is actually an island? Or Manhattan's actually an island? Bet you didn't know that. In fact, there's a lot of different islands like Staten Island. Basically, lots of islands around here. When you look at a map, it looks like one sort of landmass again, but it's really just like, oh, there's so many islands going on here, because that's just kind of the land mass that is there. But yeah, as well as that, we've also got the fact that that the United States itself, so the US government, owns a bunch of things. So Puerto Rico, obviously, like, there's a whole state contention there, but also the US Virgin Islands, owned by the America. Also, there's Guam, there's a bunch of other territories, but interestingly, they also own a bunch of atolls. So, the most famous one, the most ridiculous one, I should say, is the Palmyra Atoll. So, the Palmyra Atoll is found right here. I couldn't find it on a map if I tried. As you can see, it's just here, just the northeast of Kiribati. It's this tiny little atoll, which technically belongs to America, because it had some bird poop on, and America just went and claimed a lot of stuff way back when. And one of the things they claimed was this, as well as taking Cuba, which again they gave back at some point. Contentious stuff there, by the way. Oh, this is like the tiniest fact that I'd love to bring up sometime. There's this tiny little exclave in Cuba that belongs to, it actually belongs to, to exclave of America in Cuba, where Guantanamo Bay is, and it is officially marked on a map, and Cuba are not happy with that at all. But yeah, so that is that part over there, and then we've got the Palmyra Atoll, found over here. There's a bunch of atolls where no one lives, but they're officially part of the US, and there's a whole, what happens if people are born there? But yeah, they're called, they're atolls, they're unincorporated US territories, because what can you do there? Nothing, really. They just exist. So yeah, there you go. There are a bunch of atolls living in the United States has a whole bunch of islands. Every state has islands, and then then the United States government also has islands. It's nuts. It's crazy. You might not have known about it. So with that said, let me just talk about one more thing, because Canada, everyone knows Canada has islands. You can look at a map and very clearly see, it's for both these islands here and for Greenland, it's way better if we do it like this. But if you look at a map, you can see how, oh yeah, there's a lot of islands attached to Canada. But the truth is it not only has a lot of islands like that, but also has one of the craziest island thing possibilities. So I'm going to search for it right now, because again, it's such a tiny thing, and I'm scared I'll mess it up. But there's a lake called Geography Lake, if I'm not mistaken. So here it is. So yeah, it's Geography Lake. It's just a random Google Maps attachment, but it's the only island in a lake and an island in a lake on an island in the world. There's meant to be one in the Philippines, but apparently it was disproven. So this is a island which exists in a lake. So as you can see, it's surrounded by water. But then the island that island in the lake is on is actually in its own lake, as you can see, entirely separated. But then the island that's all on, the landmass that's all on, is one big island too. So it's a island on a lake on an island on a lake on an island, which isn't connected to the rest of Canada, which is nuts. No one's ever been there, I don't imagine, but it's pretty cool that something like this exists. I'd love to go sometime, except I really wouldn't, because that would just be a terrible idea in general, but you could do it if you wanted to. You want to go to the only island in a lake and an island in a lake and an island, go to Nunavut, a place with a population of about 60,000, if I'm not mistaken, and you can experience the joys of Geography Lake. So yeah, thank you very much for watching today's video. If you did enjoy it, then I guess you could let me know. But yeah, there's one video because I made a video called is this a country, weird countries part 1. The one I'm considering making a video on is Madagascar. like the whole like, do people really live here? And the answer is yes, but that's something I've been considering. Also, I know people can be like, you know what, you should have had more depth on things or whatever weird criticisms. But no, I wanted to just quickly say that I know I focused entirely on the Northern Hemisphere. You know, but let's be honest, Northern Hemisphere, best hemisphere, right? Am I right? Second channel, don't care. Goodbye.